Disclaimer: this story contains unhealthy relationship dynamics and other content that modern viewers might find upsetting. Listen at your own risk. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I will be reading from The Man Without a Heart by Ruby M. Ayres, and I will be continuing where we left off with Chapter 2. It was long past midnight when Linda closed the lid of the gramophone with a resolute little snap and insisted that everyone must go to bed. "You'll be so cross tomorrow that I shall hate the sight of you," she declared, "and Barbara's got a journey before her. No, not another word, I insist." "And as the first thin end of the wedge, behold," Edmund Hyde said laughingly, and switched off the light. There was a chorus of laughter and protest, and Rufus quickly stretched a hand past his brother-in-law and promptly turned the lights on again, his quick eyes noticing that Edmund had moved towards Barbara Weir. "How mean!" she accused him mockingly. "Don't they approve of kissing in the backwoods, Mr. Asher?" He made no answer, and Linda began to drive her guests out of the room and upstairs. "Come and have a smoke, Asher." A man named Hugh Langley, whom Rufus rather liked, touched him on the arm, and together they crossed the hall to the smoking room. Dancing not much in my line. Getting old, I suppose," Langley said, stifling a yawn. "Have a cigar?" "No, thanks, I've got my pipe." Edmund Hyde had followed them, and was standing by the table mixing whiskeys and sodas. "Jolly hot, isn't it?" he said casually. "This is the second collar I've ruined tonight. I must say I like dancing, though. Keeps you fit. Do you good to take it up, Rufus," he added, nodding towards his brother-in-law. "I should hardly be a success without the other accomplishments, too, should I?" Rufus asked, coolly. "What other accomplishments?" "Sitting out in dark corners, making love to other men's wives." Langley laughed lazily as he stretched his long, slim form on a couch by the open window. "That's not an accomplishment, it's a crime, isn't it?" he demanded. "Apparently not here," Rufus answered. Edmund pushed a whiskey across to him. "Don't croak so much, man. Have a drink and cheer up." He raised his own glass. "Well, here's luck," he said sententiously, and drained it. Langley followed suit laconically. "Ching-ching," he said. There was a little silence. Then Edmund Hyde yawned and looked at his watch. "Past 2! Lord, I'm off to bed! Coming, you chaps?" "My dear fellow," Langley objected, "give us a chance. This is the first time I've been really cool or comfortable all the evening. Leave me to it, for heaven's sake. I'll lock your beastly windows and shut out the burglars, if that's what you're afraid of." "Righto! Good night, then." He went away whistling cheerily, and Langley put out a languid hand and dragged another cushion beneath his head. "Nice chap, Hyde," he said. Rufus made no answer. He was sitting on the edge of the table, his hands in his pockets. Langley twisted his head round and looked at him. "I'll give you the large sum of 1 shilling for your thoughts," he said after a moment. Rufus roused himself and laughed. "They wouldn't be worth it to you." He strolled over to the open window and looked into the deserted garden. "How long have you known my sister?" he asked. Langley considered. "About 3 years, 2 perhaps," he said at last. "Met her at the Barringtons." "Know the Barringtons?" "No." "Nice family. You'd like 'em. Young Barrington was at Oxford with Hyde, I believe." "I see." Rufus turned and strolled back again to his seat on the edge of the table. "Do you know Miss Weir?" "Do I know her?" Langley laughed, rather ruefully. I do, and I know that she can't stand me. Hates me, in fact." "Why do you think so?" Langley shrugged his shoulders and settled them more comfortably among the cushions. "One knows these things by instinct. I should have thought you would have noticed it for yourself. She never speaks to me if she can help it." He paused, then added slowly, "She's a little vixen. She'd like to turn me out of the house if she could." Rufus was hardly listening. He had just heard Barbara's cheery laugh on the staircase outside, and for the moment it held his unwilling attention. Then he heard her running steps upstairs, and the shutting of a door somewhere overhead. Had she been talking to Hyde, saying good night to him, perhaps, snatching a few stolen moments on the stairs where they were free from interruption? Barbara Weir and Linda's husband! It seemed as if those moments outside on the terrace must have been a dream, as if they could never never really have happened. And yet, the passionate embrace had been real enough, and the breathless, whispered words. And tomorrow, in a few short hours, they were going away together, and Linda's life would be ruined. Langley had been watching him curiously from beneath his level brows, and now he said again, with a shade of interest in his lazy voice, "I'll double my offer. I'll make it 2 shillings if you'll tell me what thoughts are capable of making you look so like a murderer." Rufus stood up with a short laugh. "It must be my natural expression. I'm tired. I'll say good night." "Night, old boy. Pleasant dreams." Langley lay back on the cushions and closed his eyes with a little sigh of contentment. The house seemed very quiet as Asher went upstairs. The landing lights had been lowered, and outside the closed doors, shoes and slippers of all sizes and descriptions stood neatly side by side or leaned sleepily together. There was one pair, small black satin shoes with crimson heels, at which Asher glanced furtively before he hurriedly looked away again. They were Barbara's shoes, he knew. He had watched them twinkling round the crowded room, and they had walked beside him through the moonlight across the sleeping garden. He had felt inexpressibly drawn to her until that moment on the terrace, and now he hated her. His face was ugly in its hardness as he went on to his own room and shut the door. The window was open, and an edge of lace curtain stirred in the night breeze as, without turning on the light, he crossed the room and sat down, looking into the garden. A little further along on the left, the light from the smoking room where he had left Langley shone out into the garden, making a square yellow patch on the grass. Rufus filled his pipe and lit it, and leaning his arms on the window ledge, lost himself in thought, merciless thought of what he meant to do in the future. Primitive methods were the only ones he understood. There was nothing subtle or clever in his mind. When he wanted a thing done, he took the sledgehammer, most obvious way of doing it. And tonight the thing he had set his heart upon was the saving of his sister's happiness. She had always been the greatest factor in his life, and she was still his first and deepest consideration. Her happiness must be saved at all costs. It mattered nothing who else was sacrificed to that end. And by the time his pipe was finished, Rufus Asher had found his way. He rose and was about to knock the dead ashes from the bowl onto the window ledge when a faint, indefinite sound on the landing outside caught his ear. A loose board, the creak of a door. Nothing of greater significance. To an untrained ear, it would probably have passed unnoticed, but Asher had lived so long in the open that he had learned to read meaning even in the varied rustle of the trees and the trembling of the grass underfoot. So he put his pipe back into his pocket and softly crossed the room to the door, and then it came again, more definite now, a light step. A woman's step, and the blood beat in a wave to his face as his fingers groped through the darkness and found the door handle. A clock somewhere in the house struck 4, and under cover of its chime Rufus opened the door and looked out onto the landing. A wavering flicker of candlelight was sending weird shadows on the paneled walls and low ceiling, and the candlestick was being carried by a woman who at that moment was descending the staircase. The loose folds of her robe were caught together around her, as if to prevent the soft soughing noise it would otherwise have made over the carpet. Rufus Asher stepped out onto the landing, and as if she felt his presence, the woman turned with a little shrinking movement of fear and saw him standing there. There was a moment's silence, then she laughed softly. "Ruffo, how you startled me! Can't you sleep either?" "I can't. I was going down to look for a book." She came back and stood beside him, and he saw how pale she was and how her hand shook. He took the candlestick from her and set it down on a small side table. You're dropping grease all over the carpet," he said. "I'm sorry if I frightened you, Linda. I didn't think it was you." "You didn't think it was me? Who did you expect to see, then?" Her bright eyes peered interestedly up into his face. "You bad boy! Were you going to keep a tryst with someone?" They were both speaking in whispers for fear of rousing the house, but Rufus did not smile as he answered, "You are lucky I didn't grab you from behind or shoot at you, thinking you were a burglar. I generally carry a gun." "A gun? Oh!" She pursed up her reddened lips distastefully. "Have you got it in your pocket, Ruffo?" No, and you'll take your death of cold standing there in that rag. Go back to your room. I can lend you a book if you want one. She gave a little indignant cry. Rag, Ruffo! Do you know that this garment costs 25 guineas? His hard face softened. What a baby you are, with your fallas, he said. He laid his hand on her shoulder and, stooping, kissed her. Go back to bed and get warm. Warm? I'm burning hot now. Feel! She took his hand and laid it against her cheek. Then she laughed and released him. Good night, Ruffo. Pleasant dreams. Good night, my dear. He watched her back to the door of her room, past those little black slippers with the crimson heels. Then suddenly she turned and came back, cuddling her little body into his arms and wetting her arms round his neck. You'll always love me, Ruffo. Promise? Always. He held her for a moment almost fiercely, then put her away and went back to his own room. He was up early the next morning. He walked down into the village and sent a wire off long before anyone else in the house was astir. But as he came back across the dew-washed garden, he saw Barbara Weir standing on the terrace. She wore a tweed coat and skirt and a little close-fitting hat, and as he drew near to her, he saw that her face was sad. Good morning, he said perfunctorily. She turned at once and smiled. Good morning. I was just thinking how horrid London will be after this lovely country. You're going to London today? Yes, she sighed. My train goes at 9:40. That's why I'm ready dressed. There won't be much time after breakfast. He stood beside her, looking across the garden. When are you coming back? He asked. Coming back? She made a little grimace. I'm not coming back, worse luck. His eyes fell to the level of hers. Never is a long day, Miss Weir. I am sure my sister would be sorry to think she is never to see you again. She flushed faintly. I don't see why she should mind. We've been good friends, but friendships come to an end like everything else. I don't admit that. Don't you? It's true all the same, and you ought to know that it is, seeing you have been abroad. How many years? His face seemed to sharpen. Are you going abroad? He asked slowly. She seemed to hesitate. Then she nodded. I am. Soon. Yes. I don't know why I'm telling you. Nobody else knows. Not that it's a secret exactly. Everyone will know soon. But I didn't want anyone to know just yet. I shall not tell anyone, I promise you. She looked up at him swiftly. I know. I always felt that I can trust you. I suppose lots of people have confided secrets to you. Haven't they, Mr. Asher? Some. The breakfast gong sounded, and Barbara turned. We must go in. She gave one last look round the garden. I wish I wasn't going away, she said again. Why go then? Why? She looked up at him. Because I can't always do exactly what I should like, I suppose. They were at the house door now. I am going to town by that 9:40, Asher said. If I may travel up with you. She looked up at him smilingly. Oh, will you? That will be nice. You are very kind, he said formally. They went in to breakfast together. Linda was not down, but her husband sat at the head of the table, and Langley had just put in a yawning appearance. Good morning, everybody, Barbara said lightly. She took a seat beside Edmund Hyde. Bacon and egg, please, and a basin to catch my tears in. Edmund, do you realize that I am leaving you this very morning? Really leaving you? Edmund made a mock gesture of despair. Alas, to my undoing, he moaned. Mr. Asher is going to London, too, so we're going to console one another on the journey, Barbara rattled on. She seemed to Asher as if she was talking for effect, trying to express a gaiety which she did not feel. Edmund looked across at him. You are going to town, Rufus? Rather sudden, isn't it? Oh, I'm coming back. You're not rid of me yet, Rufus answered grimly, but I've some business to see to, so I thought I'd get it over. He looked at his brother-in-law steadily. Are you going up yourself? Edmund shook his head. No such luck. Not yet, at least. I may steal a weekend later on, if Linda can make herself happy without me, he added, with a touch of sarcasm. One of the maids came to the door. The car is waiting for Miss Weir, sir. Barbara sprang up. Already? Good heavens, my watch must be slow. I won't be a minute. I must just say goodbye to Linda. Sorry Barbie's going, Edmund said when the door had closed behind her. She's a good sport, and just the one for a party like we are. How long have you known her? Have you known her long? Rufus asked. Edmund considered. Yes, some time. Before I knew Linda. I see. Well, if you'll excuse me. He went out into the hall for his hat and coat, and as he stood there, Barbara came running down the stairs. Linda says you're to go and say goodbye to her. She wants to know what you mean by going to London. She's very angry. Rufus climbed the stairs obediently and knocked at his sister's door. Linda was sitting up in bed, very pretty in a lace wrapper and pink boudoir cap. Ruffo, you're not running away, surely, she said in dismay. Why, didn't you tell me? Are you so tired of us? I'm not running very far, only to London, and I shall be back tonight. And I'm not a bit tired of you, and you know it, he answered, stooping to kiss her. I've got some business to see to. Be back for dinner, then. She blew him a kiss, and Rufus went downstairs again to find Barbara already in the car. Hurry, hurry, she called to him. We shall only just catch the train, Edmund says. Hoping you will miss it, Edmund supplemented from the doorstep. Bye-bye, Barbie. Come again soon. Yes. The car whirled them away down the drive and out into the main road, and glancing at his companion, Rufus saw that her eyes were full of tears. She brushed them away indignantly. It's silly, isn't it? But I've had such a good time, and I hate saying goodbye to people. He made no answer, but his heart swelled with bitter anger, remembering what he had overheard last night. They had a carriage to themselves going to London, and Barbara seemed to have recovered her spirits, and laughed and chattered happily. I wonder if I shall ever see you again, Mr. Asher, she said abruptly, just before the train ran into Victoria. He looked at her with a strained smile. Why not? It's a small world, Miss Weir. I know, but I often meet people and get to like them and never see them again. Are you trying to pay me a compliment? What do you mean? Am I included in the people that you have got to like? She flushed slightly, but nodded. Yes, I liked you from the first moment we met. You see, you were different somehow. And last night, do you know, Mr. Asher, what you said about freedom has haunted me ever since. What did I say? About riding miles over prairie land, where men and women are good pals and hard workers. It sounded fine to me. He laughed gruffly. I dare say I let my tongue run away with me. You would probably hate Australia and the people I like out there. I dare say at the end of a week you would be longing for London and a new frock and the men you danced with last night. She made no answer, and the train ran into the station and stopped. Rufus called to a porter. I will say goodbye then, Barbara said quickly. We go different ways. I have a car somewhere, Rufus answered, if you will allow me to drive you to your hotel. She laughed. With all my luggage? It is quite a big car, and the luggage will not be in the way. Very well. Thank you. If you will wait a moment, I will find it. He left her for a few seconds, then came quickly back. The car is outside, and I have had your luggage put in, if you will come. She followed him out of the station. A big, closed car stood at the curb, and Barbara's luggage was piled on top. Do you drive yourself? She asked in surprise, as he stood aside for her to enter. My man brought it, but I have sent him away. I prefer to drive alone. I see. He got in beside her and shut the door. Barbara made a little grimace as she looked out of the window. We seem to have left the sunshine behind us, she complained. It's been raining here, and there's quite a mist. Asher glanced at the sky. We shall probably have a fog, he said briefly, but isn't this your usual London weather? You talk as if you were not an Englishman, she challenged him. He shrugged his shoulders. I feel as if I am not. I have been away so long. I shall go back to Australia as soon as I can manage it. Her face sobered, and presently she asked, Do we all seem so very horrid that you cannot bear to stay? I am sorry if I give you that impression. She made a gesture of repudiation. Don't speak like that. Your voice sounds so artificial, and I know you are not that. Miss Weir, you know very little about me. She frowned. Do I? Why do you say that? Because I am sure that you do not realize what a brute I could be if I felt justified. She laughed. That sounds alarming. She leaned forward and rubbed the mist from the window. You're going a long way round, Mr. Asher. I'm trying to avoid the traffic. I see. The rain was coming down faster. Asher opened the window in front of him, and the water trickled off onto the bonnet of the car like a little rivulet. Barbara shivered. What a dreadful day! Yes. The swift motion of the car made her feel drowsy, and she was silent for some time. Then suddenly she roused with a start and sat up at swift attention. Mr. Asher, where are we going? She leaned forward again and peered into the wet grey afternoon. Why, we're not in London at all, she said in sharp amazement. No. With a sudden turn of the wheel, he drew the car to one side of the road and stopped the engine. Then he turned in his seat and looked at her with a grim face. I have something to say to you, Miss Weir. To say to me? The color ran into her cheeks and faded quickly. What have you got to say to me? She asked. He did not answer at once, and she said again with a little catch in her voice. Why do you look at me like that? You look so strange. What is the matter, Mr. Asher? He shifted his position and stretched one arm in front of her, catching hold of the door handle as if to prevent her from opening it, and said in a curiously level voice, You told me last night that I was a hard man, Miss Weir, and you were right. I am hard, and that is why I have brought you here today. Last night on the terrace of my sister's house, when you were there with Edmundtide, I was there too, and I heard every word that was said between you. His steady eyes never moved their relentless gaze from her face, and she sat perfectly still, staring at him as if fascinated. I had a great regard and respect for you, Miss Weir, until then, but now I know you are no longer worthy of my consideration. But I love my sister, and I am not going to stand by and allow you to ruin her happiness and her life. You understand. Twice she tried to speak, but no words would come. She was trembling violently, and her lips were white, but at last she stammered out, You heard? What did you hear? I heard you arranged to go away today. With my sister's husband. There was a tragic silence. Then suddenly Barbara covered her face with her hands as if she could no longer bear the keenness of his gaze. The rain pattered down on the roof of the car, and the drops chased one another down the window like tears. But for a moment, the only sound of which Barbara was conscious was the loud, painful beating of her heart. It seemed to be throbbing up in her throat, choking her. Then at last she spoke in a trembling whisper. What are you going to do with me? Rufus hesitated, then his face, which had momentarily relaxed, settled once more into hard lines. I'm going to keep you a prisoner until you give me your word of honor that you will not see that scoundrel again, or until I am satisfied that you are no longer a danger to my sister's happiness. Her hands fell slowly from her face, and she looked up with a sudden flash of courage. A prisoner? Such a thing is absurd. Impossible. He shrugged his shoulders. It may not be the way you do things in this enlightened England, Miss Weir, but it is the only way I know whereby I can secure my sister's happiness and peace of mind. There was an eloquent silence. Then Barbara laughed a broken, wavering laugh, which held a flash of defiance. And how do you propose to explain things to everybody? She asked. Do you think they won't wonder where I am, and why they don't hear from me? What will you tell everyone? He answered unhesitatingly. What would you have told them if I had not prevented you from carrying out your plans? Would you have felt bound to explain, or give reasons for running away with another woman's husband? I think not. Her face grew crimson, and dangerous sparks filled her eyes. You are doing a thing which is punishable by law, she said. He hunched his shoulders indifferently. I have not much respect for a law that allows one woman to ruin another's happiness with impunity. She sat silent, her hands tearing nervously at each other. Then she said more quietly, Mr. Asher, I am sure you do not realize what you are doing. I ask you, I beg of you, for both our sakes, to let me go. No. She sat staring before her at the dreary afternoon, her breath coming fast. Then she broke out again. Where are you taking me? What are you going to do with me? You will see presently. You are judging me and Edmund unheard. You do not know the truth. If you did, I am concerned with nothing except my sister's happiness. She caught her breath with a frightened sound. You think so much of her? She is all I have in the world, and I respect and honor her as I have never been able to respect or honor any other woman. I see. She felt as if she were in a dream, and yet her brain had never been more clear and active. Every nerve in her body seemed tuned up and ready to meet what was coming next. When he took his hand from the door, she gave a little movement forward as if to open it, and he said at once, I should not do that if I were you. There is nobody about, and if you managed to run away, I could easily overtake you. She sat back again, breathing fast, and he started up the engine, and the car moved slowly forward once more. After a moment, she asked, What are you going to do with me? Shut me up somewhere? Starve me? Oh, Mr. Asher, I beg of you to think. You're frightening me. You couldn't be so cruel. I could be more cruel to a woman who has... I could be more than cruel to a woman who has treated my sister as you have, Miss Weir. How have I treated her? What have I done? What did she tell you? She has told me nothing. I discovered it all for myself. She broke into shrill laughter. Her nerves were beginning to stampede. It's like a melodrama with you for the villain. Might have my hair cropped and wear a convict dress. You were talking nonsense. She turned to him with pathetic eagerness. Yes, we are both talking nonsense, aren't we? It's only just a joke, isn't it? Say that it is. We've been good friends, you and I. I like you. She stopped, but he said nothing, and taking courage from his silence, she laid a trembling hand on his arm. Stop the car and let me go, Mr. Asher. I'm frightened. Please let me go. No. There was ugly, grim determination in his face and in his voice, and her hand fell nervelessly from his arm. The blood receded from her cheeks as she looked at him, and a new terrible dread crept into her mind. Was he mad? The thought turned her cold. One heard of such things, and read of them in the papers. That he was a strange man she knew for herself. Even Linda had admitted it. And he had lived so long abroad, and in wild circumstances. Supposing he was out of his mind. The fear gave her back her self-control. She managed a pale smile. Well, wherever you are taking me, I hope there will be some food. I'm hungry. It must be long past lunchtime. I'm sorry. I'm used to going without food for hours myself, and I forgot. We have about another 30 miles to go. The afternoon was drawing in quickly. The narrow road with its dripping wet, overhanging trees was dark and depressing. Now and again Barbara tried to read the directions on signposts that they passed, but it was impossible. In spite of her fear, she was conscious of a thrill of excitement. The speeding car and the hard, set face of the man beside her made her blood leap, even while the thought of the future touched her heart with apprehension. He spoke suddenly. You have not troubled to deny my accusations, Miss Weir. I think you are wise. She raised her head proudly. Why should I deny anything to you? He looked down at her, breathing hard. Then he broke into rough speech. I thought you were different from all the other painted dolls I met in my sister's house. I believed in you. I was glad I had come back to this rotten country just because I had met you. And then she looked up at him, pale to the lips, but with unflinching eyes. And then what? She asked. You know the rest. I heard you and saw you for myself. I saw you in that man's arms, heard his words to you, and I realized what a fool I'd been. She shivered, then she answered slowly. Yes, I think you are right to call yourself a fool. The ugly lines in his face deepened. You are very candid, Miss Weir. Her voice rose passionately. You are a fool, just a blind, narrow fool, in spite of all your boasted experience, so that you can only see along the pathway of your own bigoted opinions. You talk about all my friends and myself, and despise us, yet we are all 1,000 times more generous and tolerant to one another than you could ever be. You make a friend of Hugh Langley, a man who, if you knew him as I do, you would want to kick out of the house. You think you are such a fine judge of character, so infallible. Her voice was biting in its scorn. Someday you'll find out the truth. Someday you'll be sorry. Someday it will be my turn to make you suffer for what you're doing to me now. The car shot forward with additional speed beneath the sudden spur of his foot, and for some time neither of them spoke, till he leaned forward and switched on the headlamps. They cut the darkness before them with widths of brilliant light, and Barbara closed her eyes with a little feeling of giddiness. She was faint and overwrought, and the darkness and dreariness of the countryside added to her fear. Where was he taking her? What would he do to her? And with another spurt of failing courage, she began to plead with him again. And if it had been been your sister instead of me? If it had been Linda who was going to do the same thing, taking another woman's husband, would you have treated her like this? Linda could never have done such a thing, he answered obstinately. It is not in her nature, and you will not help yourself by suggesting it. And Edmund, Barbara asked, with white lips, are you going to take him a prisoner too, when you have settled with me? Or are you too much of a coward to bully a man? She saw the dull flush that crept to his sunburnt face, but he made no answer, and they had gone some distance farther before he broke out again. Twice in my life I have stood by and seen the ruin and unhappiness caused by women like you. For my sins, I once imagined myself in love with such a woman, and she turned me down and went away with a married man, my best friend, a man with whom I had worked for years and whom I trusted. She made him mad about her, and he left his wife and his home and his work, everything for her sake. She ruined him, and he died 4 years afterwards, a drunken waster. And you blame the woman? Barbara asked fiercely. What about the man? She tempted him. She put herself in his way. If she had not done so, he would have been alive today and happy and prosperous. And so you are punishing me because of other cases you have known? I'm not punishing you. I am preventing you from doing harm to yourself and to my sister. She laughed with tremulous scorn. You are, in fact, instituting yourself my guardian angel. He made no reply, and with an effort she controlled herself sufficiently to say, Don't you see what an impossible thing you are doing, Mr. Asher? It might be all right in the backwoods of Australia, or places like that, but here, he broke in roughly, here it would be better for everyone if such things were taken in hand more drastically. Divorce and immorality are treated too lightly. His voice rose excitedly. Why, years ago a man would have shot his best friend dead if he had dared to treat his womenfolk in the way that all your friends seem to treat theirs today. She made a hopeless gesture. Things have altered. You must see that. We all look at things differently. I can only see that one thing is right and another thing wrong. I can't alter the morals of the world, and I don't want to try, but I'm not standing by while you wantonly ruin my sister's life. I love my sister, Miss Weir. Hard man as you think me, brute and fool as you called me just now. You love her, and you hate me. Is that it? She asked bitterly. Their eyes met for an instant in passionate antagonism. With every word he spoke, she could feel this man's determination and relentless power, and in spite of her rage and sense of fear and injustice, she was conscious of unwilling admiration for him. He was a squaw man. He employed only the crudest and roughest of methods, but by their means he would work his will and accomplish the thing he had set himself to accomplish. But she was totally unprepared for the sudden change that crossed his face, such a look of passionate revolt and rage that for a moment she was left with a blinding sense of unreality, before he said, in a voice that carried with it unalterable conviction in spite of its violence, I will tell you something now, Miss Weir, something which you may disbelieve if you like, but which is the solemn truth nonetheless. The night I met you, I thought I had met my fate. As I said just now, you seemed different from all the rest. In spite of your nonsense and light-heartedness, I thought you were good and honest, and I put you into a place in my life where hitherto only my mother and Linda had been. It was not that I ever flattered myself that you would give me a serious thought, but you were kind, and I never felt awkward or at a disadvantage when I was with you. I liked your company. I found myself looking for you if you were not in the room. Perhaps I have been spared much suffering because of what I saw and heard last night. Barbara laughed scornfully, and the blood rose in an angry tide to his face. You may laugh and sneer at me, he said steadily, but I could have loved you. I could have loved you so dearly that I would have given you my life had it been necessary to your happiness. He drew a hard, difficult breath. Well, that's ended and done with, thank God! You convicted yourself and showed me what a fool I was, and that's all. And so you are doing this to pay me out, she said, and then in a broken whisper she added, You are very clever. He stopped the car with a sudden jerk and peered forward into the darkness. There are 2 turnings here. I'm not sure which is the road. He leaned past her and opened the door. I'm sorry, but I must ask you to move so that I can get out and see. Barbara obeyed silently. Her limbs felt cramped, and now she began to walk again. She realized how cold she was. The rain was still pouring down relentlessly, but the trees were thick overhead at that particular spot, so that she was fairly well sheltered as she stood waiting beside the car. Rufus walked to a signpost at the crossroad and peered up at the whiteboard, and in that moment Barbara made up her mind. She cast one swift glance behind her, then she turned and ran wildly, as if her life depended upon it, down the road along which they had come. She was spattered with mud and drenched before she had gone far, but she did not stop. To be free, to escape, was her one thought. When presently she heard heavy steps behind her, it seemed to increase her strength. Her feet hardly touched the ground as she sped on and on. Her breath labored, her hands stretched blindly out before her. But fast as she ran, the following steps seemed to gain on her with every moment, and with sudden desperation she turned into the hedge which curved away a little at that point from the road, and pressed back against the wet trees and undergrowth, panting and terrified, not daring to move. A moment, then the steps came on, drew level with her, then passed, and faded away in the distance. She stood up. She was shaking in every limb as she looked wildly round. Where could she go? She felt desperately that wherever she hid, he would find her. His keen eyes would search her out. Then she heard him coming back, and his steps sounded so sinister and terrifying in the darkness that against her will she gave a little stifled scream as she began to run frantically back the way she had come, seeking vainly on each side for some opening in the hedge, some gateway through which she might escape. Her drenched skirts clung about her, hampering every step. She had lost her hat, and her hair was tumbling anyhow about her shoulders. It seemed to her excited imagination that Asher was close behind her, that he had but to put out his hand to seize hold of her, and she nerved herself to a last desperate effort. A branch of blackberry caught at her coat, and as she turned to tear herself free, she slipped on a deep rut by the roadside and, twisting her ankle, came heavily to the ground. And that is the end of Chapter 2 of The Man Without a Heart by Ruby M. Ayres. Thank you for listening to this chapter with me, and I hope that you listen to future chapters so you can find out how this book continues. Have a